What's up guys, welcome to the review show where today I'm talking about TV shows, starting with Space Force. So Space Force is the new Steve Carell, Greg Daniels TV show on Netflix, all about the establishment of the Space Force. Now the Space Force was something that was brought up by Donald Trump. It is a real thing that's being developed. Steve Carell saw this, thought, oh, that would be a great idea for a TV show, and that's what we've got now, a TV show based on a real thing that doesn't actually exist yet. So this show has been compared to The Office because it has got Steve Carell from The Office, and it's made by Greg Daniels, who made The Office. And I'm talking about the American Office, by the way, the better version of The Office. This show, being compared to that, is a bad thing. This is not The Office, this is not the same type of show as The Office. The Office was very much a documentary style show. This is much more of a traditional comedy sitcom show. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just to say, if you're going into this expecting another version of The Office, don't. That's not what this is. And to treat it in the same vein as that was going to unfairly compare that to Space Force. But Space Force, I did like it. I thought it was quite good. It's not great by any means, it does have problems. There are 10 episodes, each episode's about half an hour long, some slightly longer, some slightly shorter. Basically, Steve Carell's character is the general or military guy, I can't remember his exact rank, who was appointed to head this new space division to basically militarize space. You see his family, his daughter, his wife, you see the people that he's working with. And I think there are some really cool ideas in here, there's some good episodes in here, but it seems about halfway through that they are dragging things out. The overarching narrative of this season isn't quite there. And there are a lot of standalone episodes, there are a lot of cool, interesting stories. Like there's one episode where he's focusing on trying to get a monkey to fix a space station, and that's just hilarious. It's bizarre and weird and funny, but it's really well done. Steve Carell is putting on a very military style voice, and that can affect his performance in certain regards. You can either think, right, he's nailing it, and that's great, but you can also think, oh, right, he's just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. I do think overall he does a good job of this role, and it's Steve Carell, he's always likable. I think the real standout here though is John Malkovich. John Malkovich playing the head scientist at Space Force. His character, as we find out throughout the season, has a lot more to him than initially thought. He's not just your straight up stereotypical scientist, and he's got a lot of sarcasm to him, he's got a lot of humour to him, and this show does a good job of exploring him deeper and adding certain other themes and messages in there. Lisa Kudrow plays Steve Carell's wife. One of the interesting things about this is that sometime between the opening of the first episode and then halfway through the first episode, she ends up in prison. The show never explains how she's in prison or why she's in prison. She just ends up in prison. That's a really interesting thing, and I expect that at some point we're either going to find out or it's going to be one of them things that we never find out. At this point, I'm kind of hoping we never find out because I kind of like that. But yeah, it's a weird thing that happens. But yeah, she pops up here and there. She's not a regular. She is just in every couple of episodes, it seems. A lot of this, the humor in this is very farcical, very a little outlandish. It's not the most grounded show ever, so don't go into this expecting a dry, witty show like The Office. It is a very different type of humor. It's much more Parks and Recreation than it is The Office, if that kind of makes sense. And yeah, there's a lot of big names in here, a lot of familiar faces in here. At times it's not the funniest thing ever. At times it is trying too hard to be funny. At times it is relying on some older jokes and older gimmicks to be funny. But ultimately I do think it works out well. Some of the storylines aren't the most original thing, particularly the one with his daughter. The one with his daughter who is kind of falling away from her dad and having a hard time of the whole move to a different location, so on. That's been done before, it's been done better, but it does still work. So Space Force, I would say give it a go. It's quite good. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it's certainly not as bad as some people have been pointing it out to be. Second show I'm talking about today is What We Do in the Shadows Season 2. So What We Do in the Shadows is a I'm not going to say a remake of the film because it's not a remake. It's very much set in the same world as the film. It's a TV version of the film with new characters in a new location. The first season was great. This season is better. This season has legitimately put it out there as, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best comedy show around today. It's great. It's really, really good. The three leads are incredibly likable and very incredibly funny and quirky and interesting. The show does a good job at making them likable despite the fact that they're vampires, despite the fact that they want to do horrible things because that's in their nature. And Matt Berry is great as basically Matt Berry as a vampire. Yeah, there's not much more to say about that. The three leads are really good. Of course, there are some side characters. Colin Robinson has a couple of episodes this season which focus just on him, and he's the energy vampire. It really dives into what makes him tick, why he's such an outsider, and it really shows off why people don't like him quite so much. And yeah, there's a really cool episode surrounding him and what he's capable of, and yeah, I don't want to give too much away in that regard. But some of the guest stars this season are some of the standouts. There's an episode with Mark Hamill in there, which is brilliant, and you've got some stars who are coming in and really playing against type, really just getting to have fun and mess around, it seems. One of the things that I wasn't so keen on in the first season was the use of lighting, and because this is about vampires, so the vampires can only come out at night time. The first season I felt was too dark, visually speaking. You could barely see what was going on half the time. This season does seem to have brightened things up a bit, and yeah, I've got no complaints about any of that stuff this season. 10 episodes, about 20-25 minutes each. They never outstay their welcome. They are really well paced. The overarching story focusing on Guillermo and the fact that he has got this vampire killer heritage in him is really interesting. It kind of keeps coming and going. It's not constantly there throughout the season. I think it ends in a really interesting place, and I'm curious as to what's going to happen heading into the next season. This season also dives much more into the lore, so we knew that this place had vampires and werewolves. Now we also know that there are things like trolls and goblins and witches and all sorts. The show is at risk of expanding the world too much to the point where, right, how is this believably being hidden from humans? So that's something I think they have to be really careful with going forward. It's going to end up having to come up with some sort of like Harry Potter solution where maybe they are in like this alternate, like closed off bit of reality or whatever. I don't know, but it's just a little weird how we're just now finding out that there's these huge giant trolls and there are witches as well and so on. But I really like how this show does dive into their backstories some more. There's an episode early on where you actually see what they were like before they died, before they became vampires. You get some interesting little tidbits about the fact that they have changed as individuals, and who they were beforehand is not necessarily who they are now, although some of them are still dwelling on it. So I think this show does a great job at exploring the characters while also expanding on the plot and being just really, really funny. Hopefully this season gets some big award attention because I really do think this is one of the best comedies out there right now. Final show that I'm talking about today is Harley Quinn Season 1. So Harley Quinn is a DC Universe show. Now if you're watching from America, you're probably thinking, why are you talking about Season 1? We've just finished Season 2. Well, sadly here in the UK we've only just gotten Season 1. So yeah, give me a break. And Season 1, 13 episodes, it's animated, it's R-rated animation. Kaylee Cuoco, or Coco, as Harley Quinn. Lake Bell as Poison Ivy. Alan Tudyk's in there as Joker and Clayface. It's got a huge array of DC Universe characters. It's not just Batman ones, they're bringing in ones from like Wonder Woman and the Harley Quinn comic books and all sorts. This is not going to be for everyone. Personally, I think the show is great. I think it's absolutely hilarious. I think it's really well animated, really, really well voice acted. There's some good storylines going on there. Sometimes I think it goes too far and goes a little too absurd and silly, but for the most part, I think it's really, really well done. It is R-rated, like I said. There's a lot of bad language in there. There's a lot of violence and gore in there. But again, it's animated, so maybe that takes away some of the violence and the gore. I think a lot of the bad language, at least in the first few episodes, is there for shock value more than anything else. I don't think it's there because it has to be there. Eventually, I think they do find the balance right though. And I don't have a problem with any of this, by the way. I just want to point it out. Because of the R-rated nature of it, this is not going to be a show for everyone, because it is taking a much more sillier, comedic approach to the DC comics and the characters. This is not going to be for everyone. If you're expecting like a Batman the animated series style approach to things, this is not it. The show is not taking itself serious for the most part. It's not until like the final, well, I don't really want to say that. There are moments where it does take itself serious. The main storyline between Harley Quinn trying to come to terms with her falling out with the Joker and trying to set off on her own, and also trying to get revenge and make herself a big name, that stuff is often the more serious elements of it. There are some deep, dark moments, some big revelations about Harley Quinn as an individual there. In terms of the story, I think there's a lot of really cool, interesting things where like she is trying to make her own gang, she is trying to recruit members of her own gang. It's weird how she can just go onto a website on the computer and then there's a recruitment page for hoodlums and gang members, and yeah, really bizarre stuff. One thing, there's a recurring element because you have got this character, Dr. Psycho from Wonder Woman in there. There's a recurring storyline that's here where they do have one episode where they dive into the mind of Harley Quinn to really see what makes her tick, to find out what her problems are, what her past is. But then they also repeat that later on in the season with another character. I didn't like that. I didn't like how they just basically stole a story element from previous episode. So yeah, that was one thing I didn't like. And like I said, I think it does sometimes go too far with the absurdity, with the silliness of it all. There's an episode where one person can transform into a car, and it's weird. And yeah, this one person, by the way, is the one character in the entire show that I just did not like at all. The character is meant to be like an old-fashioned, like racist, homophobe character who's from like a bygone era, who's representing old ideals essentially. And this character I did not like. I didn't think he was funny. I didn't think he needed to be in the show half the time. So hopefully they fix that maybe, heading into the season 2. I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Some people aren't going to like the way that it treats certain other DC comic characters like Batman and Jim Gordon, how it is giving them a more comedic approach to things. Batman, for example, does have his deep voice, but he's also speaking really quickly. I love the depiction of Bane. They bring in Bane and he's doing a Tom Hardy impression. So he's doing like the weird, oh, I'm going to blow up your stadium stuff all the time. And it's just hilarious every single time he speaks, and the fact that he is obsessed with blowing things up. Yeah. Some of the depiction of the character are absolutely brilliant. Bane is one of them. Clayface is another, how he is they're really diving into the fact that he's like a thespian actor, so he's constantly in need of just performing and to outdoing everything. So at one point he ends up becoming one of Riddler's henchmen, and he's constantly just messing up Riddler's jokes because he himself wants to have the spotlight. He wants to help him enunciate the words and so on, and yeah, depiction of certain characters like that is just brilliant. But yeah, Harley Quinn, I really recommend it if you're a DC Comics fan. If you're not, you're probably not going to like it. A lot of the jokes are relating to the fact that it is DC Comics, how it is Harley Quinn. So if you aren't a DC fan, you're probably not going to find this funny. You're probably not going to get what half of the jokes are about. You're not going to get what half the storylines are about. Ultimately, this is about Harley Quinn falling out with the Joker, trying to make it on her own. In many ways, this is kind of what the story of Harley Quinn in the DC movies should have been with Margot Robbie. But we're getting there eventually. I do recommend it for DC fans. I don't recommend it for other people. Otherwise, I think it's a really well animated show. The character models and designs I think are brilliant. The backgrounds and stuff I'm not that keen on. I think some of the backgrounds and locations are a little on the bland side, a little too generic. But I get it, you want the characters to stand out a little bit more. But yeah, it's very bright, very colourful, full of bad language, full of violence and gore and some silly moments in there. I do recommend this show, it's good. And I'm looking forward to season 2. Hopefully we get that sooner rather than later. Although the way things are working out, we probably won't get it till next year. Overall, the 3 shows I've talked about today, Space Force, What We Do in the Shadows and Harley Quinn, if I could only recommend one, I would recommend What We Do in the Shadows. Obviously you'd have to watch the first season first. It's honestly one of the best comedies out there right now. The 3 lead characters are super interesting and funny and quirky. There's a lot of dark humour in there. They are exploring good storylines. And I would also recommend you watch the movie before you watch the TV show, because there are certain links and ties to that, without going into spoilers. But yeah, What We Do in the Shadows is the show I would recommend out of those three. Harley Quinn I would recommend to only a certain audience. Space Force I would say if you've got Netflix, give it a shot, why not? And that's all I'm reviewing today. If you've liked this show, why not subscribe to my channel to get more content like this? And of course go over to Twitter and Instagram and follow me at _GrantBurton. Until next time though, thanks for watching.